Why does the chronicler leave out Solomon's fall into idolatry? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 2 Chronicles on Walking Through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
Today we're going to be discussing 2 Chronicles chapter 9, verses 13 to 31. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 9, verse 13. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 2 Chronicles chapter 9, beginning at verse 13. The weight of gold that came to Solomon yearly was 666 talents of gold, besides what the traveling merchants and traders brought. And all the kings of Arabia and the governors of the country brought gold and silver to Solomon. And King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 shekels of hammered gold went into each shield. He also made 300 shields of hammered gold. 300 shekels of gold went into each shield. The king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. The throne had 6 steps with a footstool of gold, which were fastened to the throne. There were armrests on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the armrests. 12 lions stood there, one on each side of the 6 steps. Nothing like this had been made for any other kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Not one was silver, for this was counted as nothing in the days of Solomon. For the king's ships went to Tarshish with the servants of Hiram. Once every 3 years the merchant ships came, bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and monkeys. So King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. And all the kings of the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. Each man brought his present, articles of silver and gold, garments, armor, spices, horses, and mules, at a set rate at a set rate year by year. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots, and 12,000 horsemen whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. So he reigned over all the kings from the river to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedar trees as abundant as sycamores, which are in the lowland. And they brought horses to Solomon from Egypt and from all lands. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, first and last, are they not written in the book of Nathan the prophet, in the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite, and in the visions of Iddo the seer, concerning Jeroboam the son of Nebat? Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel 40 years. Then Solomon rested with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David, his father. And Rehoboam his son reigned in his place. In the last lesson, we had the Queen of Sheba coming to visit Solomon. She had heard of his immense wisdom and great wealth, but rather than just accepting what she heard as fact, she went to investigate for herself whether what was told to her was so. And when she visited Solomon, she proclaimed that in fact what was told to her wasn't even half of the story, for Solomon's wisdom far exceeded what was described. Solomon and the queen exchanged gifts, and she returned to her homeland. But let's not think of this visit as insignificant, for Jesus mentions it in the New Testament to condemn the people of his day for not listening to his wisdom. Jesus told them that the Queen of Sheba traveled a great distance to hear the wisdom of Solomon. Meanwhile, a man wiser than Solomon was among them, and they couldn't be bothered to travel a short distance. Coming now to verse 13, and we get a summary of just how wealthy the kingdom of Solomon was. What we find is that yearly Solomon received 666 talents of gold. Now a talent of gold weighed about 34 kilograms or 75 pounds. That means that each year Solomon obtained 22,644 kilograms or 49,950 pounds of gold. In 2024 money, that would be about 2.3 billion Canadian dollars or 1.7 billion US dollars in just gold. On top of that, Solomon received income from traveling merchants, traders, and the neighboring kings in Arabia. So over a 40-year reign, if this income remained steady, Solomon accumulated well over 92 billion Canadian dollars or 67 billion US dollars. Now, of course, Solomon didn't simply collect this money and do nothing with it. He made shields of gold and placed them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. He also used his gold to overlay his throne of ivory. This throne had 6 steps up to it, a rounded back, armrests on both sides of the seat, with crafted lions standing beside each armrest. On each of the steps stood 1 lion on each side of the throne, totaling 12 in all, likely representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Clearly, this was a magnificent throne, for no other kingdom had anything like it. But Solomon's use of gold didn't stop there. All his drinking vessels were gold, as were all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon. Nothing was silver because Solomon treated silver as if it was worthless, even though it wasn't. That's how wealthy Solomon was, in that he considered cheap what others would know as quite valuable. It's sort of like today, a billionaire viewing $100,000 as nothing, whereas to most people, that's a lot of money. Now, this doesn't mean that Solomon didn't possess silver, for he did. It's just that he valued it a lot less. Having this knowledge about Solomon and his wealth will certainly make his warnings against it in the book of Ecclesiastes make all the more sense. So it was during Solomon's reign that not only did he become rich, but he became famous because of his wisdom. People came to hear the wisdom given to Solomon from God, bringing gifts when they came, making Solomon even richer. It is said that Solomon reigned from the river, which means the Euphrates River, to the borders of Egypt. Thus with this, God fulfilled his promise to Abraham. Of course, Bible readers know that this vast influence would be short-lived, for in the latter parts of Solomon's reign he would turn to idolatry. That's a fact that the Chronicler leaves out, simply telling us that Solomon reigned over Israel for 40 years when he died, and the rest of the acts of Solomon could be found for the original reader in the book of Nathan the prophet, in the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite, and in the visions of Iddo the seer concerning Jeroboam the son of Nebat. The book of Nathan we do not have, but perhaps his events are the source material for what we have recorded for us in the beginning of 1 Kings. We do have the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite recorded for us in 1 Kings 11, verses 29 to 39, but as for Iddo the seer, we don't have his writings either, but we know he was a major seer of the time, for he also is mentioned as it concerns the records of the reigns of Rehoboam and Abijah, the next 2 kings of Judah. What we do have is enough for us to gain a full understanding of the reign of Solomon. The question that remains is, why did the chronicler leave out Solomon's fall into idolatry? Well, we always know that a writer of Scripture can't possibly record everything, for if they did, the books would become too large. But you would think that since the chronicler's focus has been on the religious history of Israel, that mentioning Solomon going off into idolatry would be a pretty major event, especially since it was the root, the original sin, if you will, for the future idolatry in Judah. Well, there are a couple things to consider. First of all, Solomon's idolatry, though still entirely wrong, was different than the idolatry of many of the future kings. 1 Kings 11 doesn't say that Solomon stopped worshiping Jehovah, but that he also worshipped other foreign gods. Now yes, the Lord was angry with Solomon and could not accept the worship of Solomon, but Solomon didn't defile the temple with idols, like future kings would. Rather, he built other high places for these gods. So perhaps the chronicler didn't mention it because it didn't affect the actual temple worship performed by the priests, even though it did affect Solomon. But there is another possibility to consider, one that we did consider briefly in our study of 1 Kings, which is that very late in life, Solomon returned to following the Lord and abandoned his idolatry. We don't get this explicitly in Scripture, but if Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, and I'm confident that he did, then the final chapter instructs children to remember thy Creator in the days of your youth, and to fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Words like these, which would have been written by a man of old age, considering the entire topic of the book, wouldn't be written by someone who was also serving idols. Now, it could be written by a man who left God at a younger age, saw the vanity of it all, and later returned, teaching children not to follow in those footsteps. But a current idolater? No. And so, if this is the case, the chronicler could have omitted it because Solomon's sins had been forgiven. And because they were forgiven, why mention it at all? For his point about idolatry is going to be taught by many of the future kings of Judah. The writer did give his readers a place they could learn more about Solomon, so he wasn't whitewashing history. But in this case, as it concerned God's forgiveness, he chose to omit the sins of Solomon in this regard. So which is it? The answer is I do not know, and it could be one I didn't think of. I know that that is not the answer that many like to hear from a preacher, but it has to be the answer when the scriptures do not say. We can't be found speaking for God when God has not spoken, a lesson we all need to learn. When Solomon died, his son Rehoboam reigned in his place. We'll deal with the beginning of his reign, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 2 Chronicles chapter 10, verses 1 to 11, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
Of his cross.